Hello everyone, in this video we are going to talk about IELTS Academic Task 1, which means we are going to learn about graphs. So as you all know, the IELTS writing test comprises of two sections, the graph and the essay. The first section is about writing the graph, and there are a few important points related to it. There are certain myths which I would like to clarify here. You are supposed to write only the summary. So when you are writing about the graph, make sure that you only write the summary of the graph, not everything. You're not supposed to describe, but summarize. So here I would like to draw your attention towards the question. The question is stated as: summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So if you look at this question, it is not asking you to write about everything. Look at this. It's saying summarize the information and by selecting and reporting only the main features, right? So which means you are not supposed to write about everything. The question itself is asking you that you summarize it. So when we say summarize, we are actually, trying to say that you are supposed to write it very precisely. You are not supposed to describe. So there is a difference between summarization and description. You're supposed to summarize the information, and that too you're supposed to talk about only the main features, which means you would get marks about on your selections also, like which particular information are you considering to be important, main feature, right? Plus you are supposed to draw comparisons between whatever information is presented to you. So this is something very important, that you understand the question very well. The essence of the question is that you are supposed to summarize the information by selecting and reporting only the main features. Okay. Again, you are supposed to write what you see. So unlike an essay where you are supposed to describe stuff, you give examples which are personal examples or some general examples. Here you are supposed to speak only about the things which you see in the graph. So you are not supposed to add any information on your own. You are supposed to very precisely describe what you see there in the graph. As I already said, you are supposed to be very precise. So you are not supposed to write in detail. You are supposed to write in a very precise manner. Club the information or combine the information. So if you are finding a graph which is depicting information, let's say from 1986 to 2006, so you are not supposed to talk about individual years, that what happened in 1986, what happened in 1987, and so on. Let's say it talks about the population growth from 1986 to 2006, and it has given information for every year: 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, like that. The population growth is given from 1986 to 2006. So let's say it was at, just for an example, 1 lakh in 1986, and it became 20 lakhs in 2006. So from 1986 to 2006, it moved from 1 lakh to 20 lakhs is what you are going to say. You are not going to talk about individual years. So you can say that the population growth, the trend of population growth was steady, or we can see a steady trend of population growth from 1986 to 2006, where it moved from 1 lakh to 20 lakh. So we can say that it grew 20 times. So this would be fine, which means you are talking about the boundary values. Do you understand this? You're supposed to talk only about the beginning and the end whenever you are talking about it. I mean, if there has been some interruption in some kind of pattern in between, also you can talk about it, but more or less it should be about the beginning and the end of the period. Then another important point about the graph is that you're supposed that it contributes lesser marks to the overall scheme of evaluation, which means if although it has never been disclosed by British Council or IDP, the essays contribute to almost, let's say, 3 bands, but an essay contributes 6 bands to the overall test. Although this is not something authentic or something which is authorized, this is a general view which I am sharing. However, this does tell us that the essays score more marks, or more marks is given to essays as compared to graphs, which means you should be really be more cautious and careful about writing. I would not say this that you should be more cautious or careful, just that since essays contribute a higher proportion to the overall marks, you should pay more attention to writing an essay, and of course you should devote more time also. You're supposed to write an essay in 250 words, whereas the graph is supposed to be written in 150 words only. So three things are important here: trend, comparison, and highlight. And we are going to see this in some examples in a while. A trend is something which you can see, like something has been increasing or decreasing, or something has remained steady. So you call it as trend. Comparison, you can make use of these statements. While A showed a rising trend, which there should be a comma after trend, B showed a falling trend. While percentage of X increased, percentage of Y decreased, the percentage of Z remained constant. So something has gone up or gone down or has remained constant. These kind of comparisons can be drawn. And highlight is something which is at the top or something at the peak. The steepest growth was recorded in, or the steepest fall was seen in, the count reached its first peak at. So we'll see these kind of expressions and a collection of such expressions in the examples that we are going to do today. This is how your essay or your graph is going to be evaluated. I will straight away read the band 9 thing. You can always make a comparison. So the four parameters on which your graph is evaluated are task achievement, cohesion and coherence, lexical resource, and grammatical range and accuracy, which means these are the 4 points on which you would be evaluated. You need to be scoring good marks on all these 4 parameters. Let's say if I have to evaluate, I'll give equal marks to each of. So let's say the test is of 5, 5, 5, 5 each. So let's say it is of 20 marks, which means each of these sections would contribute 5 marks to the overall 20 marks thing. So 5 marks for task achievement, 5 marks for cohesion coherence, 5 marks for lexical resources, 5 marks for grammatical range and accuracy, which means the marks are equally divided among all these 4 sections, and you should do equally good in these 4 sections. When it says 9 bands, it says fully satisfies all the requirements of the task, clearly presents a fully developed response, which means you have done trending, you have drawn proper comparisons, as well as told about the highlights. That means fully satisfying all the requirements of the task. Cohesion and coherence refers to easy flow of ideas, which means if somebody hears you or reads you, he or she understands you directly without paying too much attention. You know, uses cohesion in such a way that it attracts no attention. Now, this is something very interesting to read. Uses cohesion in such a way that it attracts no attention, which means even if you read without attention, even if you read it casually, you understand it, which means it should be seamless, it should be very natural. And one way to manage your cohesion is to make use of very simple structures, because if it requires attention, it means that you have written in such a manner that until unless the person is very attentive and focused, he would miss the thing. In other words, your language should be very natural and easy to understand. It should not be something which is very artistic or difficult. You are supposed to use simple words. Now, let's move on to the next point, which says lexical resources. See, this thing, sometimes people call it as vocabulary. In fact, I also have said this word or used this word to describe lexical resources. People call it as vocabulary. Now, vocabulary has a very different connotation. Vocabulary means difficult words or different words. Here it says lexical resource, which means are you able to use a wide range of words with very natural and sophisticated control of their features, and minor errors and slips are okay according to them. So, more or less, you are supposed to use contextual words which fit very well in that context. Like, let's say you're talking about a pie chart. So, in a pie chart, words like X constitutes 20% of the overall pie. Now, these kind of words, X constitutes 20% of the total pie chart, is making sense there, but constitutes otherwise looks very difficult word. But in this context, when we are talking about pie chart, constitute sounds good, which means the words you choose should be according to the type of graph that you are making there. And we are going to see a list of such words and phrases which I'm going to share on internet. They are very, very freely available. If you simply write phrases or vocabulary for graphs, you would be able to see them, and I have also compiled them from internet, which I'm going to share with you. So that's what lexical resources mean. It does not mean that you are supposed to use difficult words. It will actually be counterproductive because it says uses cohesion in such a way that it attracts no attention. So, your words, the choice of words may make your writing less cohesive because it might attract a lot of attention to understand. Okay, now let's move on to the last point, which is grammatical range and accuracy. In simple terms, you should be able to use wide range of sentence structures, and you should show enough flexibility to write long sentences as well as short sentences. So if the situation demands to write in a long sentence, you should be able to frame it. It is not that you are limited by your ability to write short sentences only. It should be like a combination of some short punches here and there and some long sentences. You should not make a deliberate effort again here to make things complicated unnecessarily. Try to make it as simple as possible. I have seen people with very good English not getting good marks in grammar or in writing overall because they overdo it. Please try to write in a very simple and direct manner. Use certain formats which are available there. If when you practice them, you would be able to understand. And instead of going with the notion that you should sound very sophisticated and your essay or writing should stand out, the more important thing is that you should match the criteria. You should meet the criteria shown here. They never say that your writing has to stand out. Please try to understand it is not a competition of English where there would be a winner and a loser. It is a task. There's a difference between competition and task. It is possible that 10 people who take the test together may score 9 bands each, which means everybody can be a winner, or each of them score 5 bands each, which means everybody could be a loser. So this is a very important point, that it is a task, not a test. In a task, you are supposed to meet certain criteria set by the task. You are not supposed to out outwin, or you are not, it is not always at the expense of someone else. All the people who are sitting in the hall might do well and score very good marks, or vice versa. So this is something very important. You have to have this in you. Since we live in a society, or the way we have been taught in our education in whatever boards, is that There is somebody who stands at the first position, there's somebody who stands at the second position. So our mindset is always working in terms of competition. We are so much into competition that our attitude and our approach towards everything has become more competitive. So looking at these four criteria, what I want to emphasize is that it is a task, and you're supposed to fulfill the requirements of a task. You are not supposed to outwit other or win over somebody else, as it happens in a cricket championship or your examination in your academics. It's a task, it's not a test. Okay, as I was telling, there are certain nouns, adjectives, adverbs which you can use, and I have compiled it from net itself. I've not really made any efforts to make them myself. As you can see here, this is a collection of phrases that you can use. Rise, so something like, for example, there was a rise in the customer numbers. There was a rise in population from 1986 to 2006. There were, or the population increased to, so from 500 it increased to 5,000. It went up to 5,000, while in 1986 it stood at 1 lakh, comma, by 2006 it rose to 20 lakhs, showing an increase of 20 times. So like this, you can use these phrases. Similarly, for a decreasing trend, you can say that population fell, or the prices of certain things fell, or the consumption of certain item fell, or there was a decrease in the consumption of the item, or there was a decline in the consumption of an item. So, these phrases are very handy. If you just glance through them once, you can understand what is like something leveled out or something did not change. The consumption of meat leveled out from 2006 to 2011, or in simple words, did not change. The consumption of meat remained steady at whatever number you want to give. So you can use these phrases to draft your thoughts, and practicing these phrases to write some sentences of your own, depending on different types of situations possible, would make all good sense. So as I've told, I've compiled it from certain sources in the net itself. If you just browse through net, you will find your own sources also. However, I found this one to be really useful. Then there are certain adjectives which describe the nature of change. Like if it is a dramatic change, means it was a big change. But if it is a slight change, it was a minor change, or a moderate change, or a marked change, or significant increase or significant decrease. Something increased significantly. So in the uh, passive voice, you would use it like this, isn't it? The consumption of meat increased significantly, or there was a dramatic increase in consumption of meat. So you can either use this ly type of structure, the consumption of meat increased significantly, or we can notice a dramatic increase dramatically, or we can say there was a dramatic increase in consumption of meat. So you can either use this ly structure or the adjective form, which is dramatic or sharp, any of these. The prices increased. Similarly, looking at the second part, speed of change, when we are describing speed of change, we can say the prices increased rapidly, or there was a rapid rise in the price, or there was a swift rise, there was a swift fall, or sudden increase or sudden fall. So you can use these adjectives and adverbs to write about the trends. Okay, let's go back to the graph. Similarly, looking at this, let's just play this. Let's just do this exercise together. We have to match the column. There was a peak in customer numbers. So I'm reading this sentence. There was a peak in customer numbers. Which one would you match it with out of these 7 or 8 graphs given here, there was a peak in customer numbers. I can see this as a peak, isn't it? So there was a peak in customer numbers corresponds to this. You can always pause the video here and do this exercise yourself. Customer numbers were erratic. Erratic was like sometimes increasing, sometimes decreasing. I can call this as, which one would be erratic? Maybe this one. This is erratic. It's not regular. Numbers fell steadily. So fell steadily seems like this. It is falling steadily. So if you see this kind of graph, you can say the numbers fell steadily, whatever the numbers represent. So the cost of the items fell steadily, like that. There was a steep rise in customer numbers. Now I can call this as steep rise. It is steeply rising, as you can see. So there was a steep rise in customer numbers. This corresponds to that. There was a slight dip. So probably this one can be called as a slight dip. There was a slight dip in customer numbers fluctuated wildly. Well, of course, this D looks like fluctuated wildly. Customer numbers plunged. So taking a plunge means like jumping inside in a swimming pool. So customer numbers plunged. This corresponds to plunging, as if we are just jumping inside us in a swimming pool. Then customer numbers fluctuated slightly. So there was a slight fluctuation. If I have to talk about slight fluctuation, probably this one corresponds to slight fluctuation, which is A. So depending on the type of graph, you can use an appropriate adjective to describe the type of change, whether it is increase or decrease, which we call as fall or rise. Depending on the situation, you can use these kind of words. All right, great. Thank you so much. So we can now move on to the next part. Here I have given you a graph without reading the answer. First of all, let us try to understand the question, and then we will go about doing this example. The best way to learn about anything is to learn with the help of an example, because it tells everything which we are supposed to do. So if you look at this particular graph, here I can see London Underground Station passengers. So this corresponds to the number of passengers at London Underground Station. And the timeline is given from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., which means from morning 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. How many passengers were there in the London Underground Station? And if we want to analyze this graph, we can talk about three things. We can kind of find out three different patterns or three different changes here, three different bullet points, whatever you call it. What kind of trend is there? Which point constitutes the highlight of this graph? And what kind of comparisons can we make? So let us start with the trend. So morning 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, there is a rising trend. From 8 to 10, there is a falling trend. Then the numbers remain steady for some time till 4 o'clock. I mean, there was less fluctuation. Then it again rose, fall. Can I call it as a fluctuating trend? So I can always call it as a fluctuating trend. But then are there very dramatic fluctuations? Well, I don't think so. It remained within the range of the minimum is 100, the maximum is 400. So I can say the number of passengers from morning till evening fluctuated between 100 to 400. So this is like being a big picture reader. If you can find out one line which summarizes the whole graph, it makes very good sense to find out that line. So here the number, in fact, if you want, you can pause the video and look at the graph yourself. I want you to find out three things: trends, some kind of comparison that you can draw, and some highlights like the peaks and the lowest numbers. So you can pause it and make your own observation. Otherwise, we are going to discuss it. Great. So we discussed about the trends. Now let us see what kind of comparisons we can draw. See, one very clear comparison that we can make is that during the early mornings and late evenings post 4 o'clock, there were more pronounced fluctuations or more higher fluctuations. So, there were conspicuous fluctuations as compared to the time during 10 to 4. I'm pausing it here, and after some time I'm going to make one more video to continue from here.